welcome back everyone to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast, the making of stories. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. Today my guest is production designer Guy Hendrix, who's here to talk about Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of Crystal Skull. We had some great conversations while he shared some of the sketches, some of the behind the scenes photos that we talked about, his story with working with Harrison Ford and walking around with him on the set, as well as the first phone call that he got from Steven Spielberg. So without further ado, here's my conversation with production designer Guy Hendrix for Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Well, good to have you. It's certainly a pleasure to be speaking to you of all the films that you have worked on. Obviously, I haven't grown up with all of them, but the ones that sort of stand out are Reloaded, Superman Returns, Elizabeth, obviously Kingdom of Crystal Skull, and so much more. So thank you for all your contribution to cinema.
Oh, well, you're very kind. I hope it's not the end. I, I hope I
That's
can keep
good.
going. Yeah.
That's good. And currently you're working on something that you're able to disclose, or because you
Yeah,
mentioned in
I'm currently working on Masters of the Universe, which is a Travis Knight film, which I'm very excited about. I'm actually very excited about working with Travis. I've admired his work for many, many years, particularly his animation as well as his live action. And I've always felt that directors who come from an animation background have a very unique vision. And it's always a lot of fun working with those type of directors. So I'm thrilled to be working with Travis on this. Yeah.
that's amazing. And that's supposed to come out next year, I'm assuming, in 2026.
I think it is, but honestly, I don't keep an eye on the release dates. I just try to
No, no,
get
no,
through
it's
it
all good.
well.
Yeah. So this is animated, right? The one that you're working
No,
on?
no, this
Or is
this will
it
be a
live
live
action?
action. It's a
Oh,
very
so
big
it's
live action film. Yeah, it's a big deal. We're trying very hard to, look, Travis and I grew up with the animation, and we are huge fans. It's very nostalgic for both of us. And I think the whole team is just driven by a vision to realize a Masters of the Universe that will please all the original fans, all the people who have nostalgia of the original animation, but also find a new audience as well. But it's a very, very exciting film. We have a brilliant team, and
yeah.
I'm honestly thoroughly enjoying the process. Very grateful to be on board. Yeah, it's exciting.
There was a 1985 or 86 live action version, right? Was if
That's
I'm not
right, the
mistaken.
Dolph
Yeah.
Lundgren film. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I remember watching that as a kid. I mean, I don't remember any of it, but I remember watching it as a kid, and I just remember the protagonist and how he sort of looked physically, and kind of like Conan O'Brien, but with Schwarzenegger. I think it was it Canon the O'Brien? What was it called? The movie with Schwarzenegger?
Uh, I don't know which one
Conan
you mean.
O'Brien is a comedian. I don't know why I said that.
Oh, you
Um,
mean Conan the Barbarian?
Conan the Barbarian. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Well, look, this film has aspects of that in a way. The aesthetic is strange. We all talk about it as a team. It's somewhere between, axe wielding barbarians and super futuristic tech. So it's, somewhere between Conan the Barbarian and Star Wars, really, isn't it? It's a
Nice.
lot of fun. It's a very wide visual scope. It's an exciting world to look at. And obviously, I can't say anything about the film,
Yeah, 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 of
but
course.
I'm incredibly thrilled at the way it's progressing and turning out. We're having an absolute ball making the film. And I think those that are privileged to see what we're doing are sort of blown away. We
Amazing.
So that's exciting. Let's keep our fingers crossed.
It's exciting. Looking forward to it. Today you're here to talk about Indiana Jones and Kingdom of Crystal Skull.
Right.
I've said this many times on this podcast, especially when the new film that came out last year. When Kingdom of Crystal Skull came out, I didn't like it.
Mm.
But just before I went to see Dial of the Destiny, I saw it again, and I was surprised that I really liked it. So
Mm.
obviously, with time, maybe it was certain expectations, or you get more mature. And I just rewatched it yesterday, and
I,
still a very good
I'm
film.
I hear you loud and clear, and I think a lot of people. I remember being at the receiving end of all the critics,
Yeah.
and I think the professional critics were sort of split down the middle. I think some of them really loved it, and some of them less so. But obviously, the internet buzz was from the kids and the younger audience was somewhat negative, and I really couldn't understand it. But I think I do in retrospect, like yourself. I think that when you have made the three films that Stephen and George had made, that were so fantastic and live in a very special place in our hearts as children and young adults growing up, we all remember where we were when we first saw Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Hmm.
It was one of those films, I think, that just it's a marked, you know, it's a benchmark in, I think, Stephen's genius to have been able to knock out a film like that based on George's idea and have it be so brilliant, which it really was. And I think because those films had such an incredible impact on culturally, they had a massive impact.
100%.
It was very, very hard for there to be such a large period of time and space, and then to have a follow-up, a fourth film, if you like. And
Yeah.
I remember feeling extremely responsible and took the production very, very seriously. I mean, it was back-breaking work to make the film live up to the expectations of the first three films, and a lot had changed, I think, in the time between the third film and the fourth film, in terms of the way films were made, the event of visual effects and CGI, which of course infiltrated and found its way into Indiana Jones 4. And, there were a lot of conversations about it, about how to use it and uh, how to use it responsibly without losing sight of what made the first three films so special, which was all those real stunts. Um, and so, yeah, it was an incredible journey. For me, it was one of those films that you pinch yourself and you feel incredibly lucky to work with Stephen, who remains even today one of the geniuses of our industry, true geniuses, and also I feel in retrospect incredibly lucky because I worked on the last damn film that in the series that he and George were actively
Involved in.
involved in.
Yeah.
And I feel very, very, very lucky. It was, it's lightning in a bottle. It's one of those opportunities once in a lifetime. And you're sitting in a meeting room over at Amblin and you're thinking to yourself, I wish there were cameras capturing this, and it would be Stephen at one end of the table and George at the other end discussing how they wanted to make the production, how they felt about the use of CGI, how they felt about where they were going to shoot, how they were going to shoot it. And I was sitting right in the middle of that conversation going, I can't believe where I am and how lucky I am. So yeah, really special. A lot long-winded way to say it really was a special experience.
No, I totally hear that. I totally feel that from your choice
Mm.
of words. And who wouldn't be? I mean,
Oh my God. Yeah.
right? Forget Indiana Jones, just to be in the room with just Spielberg, or
Mm,
Spielberg and Lucas, or Lucas
mm.
is, and working on a project with them, getting that pressure, but at the same time, getting those butterflies. It's certainly a memorable experience that I'm sure, obviously, you haven't forgotten. So that's really great.
Yeah, it was lovely to be in a room with them both together. I mean, obviously
Yeah,
I'd met George a couple of times. I was a member of his ILM, his visual
right.
effects team, when they were still up at San Rafael. And there were I think about three or 400 people at that point. So it was still quite a small enterprise before it sort of exploded with the sort of the planning of the new Star Wars films. It became a much bigger enterprise business, and I think they moved down to San Francisco, Presidio, and built a big complex there. but I was lucky enough to be in the original buildings where all the original, Star Wars films were sort of put together, and all the visual effects for all those films were made. And I'd sort of, I think, seen Stephen a couple of times on very, very early Zoom calls in the 90s, the equivalent of Zoom anyway, because there was a link between Amblin and ILM, and George would come on, sorry, Stephen would come on and talk about a few things. For example, I was working on Twister, and I think he might have, if my memory serves me right, he may have appeared briefly in one of those conversations with Jan de Bon, and I was just at the receiving end going, "Oh my God, there's Steven Spielberg." Little did I know, some 15 years later, I'd actually be talking to him on a daily basis. And of course, I was lucky. This went on beyond um, Indiana Jones. I also worked on another project, which sadly never happened, Robopocalypse, which I was developing for Stephen for approximately 2.5 years, which never happened, very, very sadly. And I, again, poured my heart and soul into that project until I simply just ran out of steam. I mean, the project never happened, and I just had to sort of go make films again, because I'd been in this sort of development process for 2 or 3 years, and it was incredibly tiring and mentally wearing. But
I
still amazing memories of those times at Amblin and working with Stephen and his incredible team.
I remember reading and following that project very vividly. And if I'm not mistaken, I checked it out recently. Obviously, IMDb is not always correct. I thought I read somewhere on IMDb that Michael Bay was involved in it, um,
Yeah.
on the project. But yeah, no, I remember the concept of it, and it was kind of like very different and similar to AI and Transformers, not in terms of the story, but yeah, it does say Ro Robocalypse, director, production unknown, Michael Bay. Yeah, but I don't know how accurate that is. But that's interesting that you talked about that. But we'll come back to that. Let's go to Indiana
Mm.
Jones. Um, you obviously you had known Spielberg and Lucas, so I'm guessing that's how you kind of came onto the project on Kingdom of Crystal Skull. And you shared some of the sketches and behind the scene photos,
Mm.
which I have. We can go through them one by one, or if you have access to them, I can give you access to share screen, and you can sort of talk about it one by one. Which way would you prefer?
Whichever way you like, really. I should
It's
mention, by the way, that I'd not met Stephen in person um, until we really started production. I was working for a Spanish director called Alejandro Amenabar,
mm-hmm,
some on a film called Agora, starring Rachel Weisz, and
mm,
I received the call while I was in Spain, and it was one of those sort of almost joke calls that you receive where you're in a hotel and you're told there's a phone call for you, and I picked it up in this you know really tatty little hotel in the middle of Spain, and the voice comes on and says, "Will you hold for Steven Spielberg?" What do you do when you get that call? And you're thinking, okay, is this one of my friends playing a prank? Which is exactly what I thought it was. And of course, the moment you hear his warm, friendly voice come on, and it's so iconic and recognizable, like an actor or a singer,
yeah.
no, it's him. And you think, okay, I'm either going to be extremely embarrassed, and this will be someone who has a very good impression of Mr. Spielberg, or it is really him. But within a few minutes, by the way he talked and how he talked and what he talked about, I knew it was him. And what he proposed was extraordinary. He said, I've seen your work on, I think it was strange. It was something like Superman Returns, which
Yeah, yeah,
Brian
it was a year
Singer.
before that or 2 years before
And
that.
he
Yeah.
said, I've seen your work on Superman Returns, and I think I thought it was brilliant, and I think we should, work together on this. And that was exactly how he put it. didn't exactly like that. I mean, what do you say? And I remember thinking, you can't, and in the industry, you can't really lie about your availability. So I remember
Everybody
saying
knows.
to him, I'm working on Agora with a friend of mine, Alejandro Menabar, and I won't be available. I don't think for your film. And he said, oh, but when are you finishing? And I told him the dates, and he said, that's going to work out perfectly. He says, get done with that and then come back. So timing was could not have been better, really. Yeah, I was very lucky. So anyway, I just had to add that in there because it's a very special moment that I remember vividly, sitting there in Madrid receiving this call and it being Steven Spielberg. You know,
Uh,
how he tracked me down to this day, I don't know, but I think when you're someone like him, you can make those things happen.
100%. And I was just going to say that I'm so glad that you shared that story because I think it's probably one of the most pivotal highlight moments in your career of your life to be able to get that call. And I've heard stories from different actors, and I'm sure you have too, and even Steven Spielberg himself, that how he, I don't know if it was back then, but now as of recently, like 5, 6 years ago, he would intentionally talk in such a way where the other person be kind of like starstruck. Not from a standpoint of like, he's Steven Spielberg, but just to kind of play with them and to be able to get that call and then work with him. I mean, whose dream it is not to do that, right? So thank you for sharing that. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
it was lovely, and I'm so fond of Steve. And I mean I haven't spoken to him for absolutely years, but I still from the very first time he spoke to me to the end, uh, he was and is an incredibly warm human being, lovely to work with, and everyone around him seems to, love the experience, you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, amazing. I direct films, and the reason I became got into films is because of Steven Spielberg, because of Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. So
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah.
let's talk about Indiana Jones and Kingdom of Crystal Skull. If I've given you share access, if you want to go through the work one by one and just kind of describe it, fans would love to hear it and see it, of course.
Uh, okay. And what we're looking at here really is a one of the very typical ways in which I tend to work and communicate with directors. And in this case, these were sketches for Stephen. And this is the way that you would enter a temple called Akator. And Akator was the center of this script, the lost city of Akator. And in our story, and indeed, in the script, there was this wonderful sort of flow of how things happened. But one of the things that I noticed as a fan of the series and as a real sort of faithful follower of the Indiana Jones kind of, I suppose, aesthetic is that there was a slight lack of descriptions of booby traps and exciting, unique ways to uh, enter spaces or find ways into spaces. And so for entering Akator, I'd come up or proposed this idea to Stephen through a series of quick sketches, as you see here. And this is a series of stairs, a spiral staircase, if you like, that goes down from the top of this sort of Mayan temple down into the depths underground. But the booby trap or the trick is that once you start walking down the spiral staircase, you trigger a booby trap that means that every single step starts to retract into the outer ring of this giant uh, sort of shaft, if you like. And eventually you simply run out of stairs and you would fall to your death onto some very nasty spikes at the
Hmm.
bottom. And of course, in the film, you may recall that our heroes enter this, and it was a set that we built, a very complicated set. The stairs retracted, and the idea is that you have to run as quickly as you can to the bottom before you run out of stairs and fall to your death. And we built this on a sound stage, and it was an extraordinary set. But anyway, this was the one of the first sketches to propose that.
Awesome. I'm just gonna go through it. Like I said, this
Ah,
is no particular order, but
yeah.
you take the floor.
This is another sketch of the same concept, and in this case, there was a description in the script that had a giant totem pole, if you like, which is triggered as an entry point to Akator. So in this case, I designed it so that these four totems were leaning against these columns. And once the key is triggered, all of these pieces come together and form a single column. And it's at that point that the floor gives way and we see the staircase down. So again, it's another one of the sketches in a series of quick drawings that I did to explain to Stephen how this might look.
And by the way, the obviously the work that that you're talking about here and how it was interpreted in the film. Again, watching the film yesterday, it's just so you know it's a set, but at the same time, it's such an elaborate set that you can't help but believe that it's real. So obviously, a lot of work and time, resources went into it, and the amount of detail, right, in the walls, on the floor, is definitely noticeable. So I just wanted to point that out very quickly. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean the sets were incredibly detailed. We had an extraordinary um, construction team headed by Greg Callis that really were amazing. I mean, all the finishes were meticulously honed in to make sure that these sets lived up to the standards of the original films. And in some cases, we hoped, outshone the original films because, of course, everything is a bit harder now in terms of convincing an audience that somewhere's real.
Hmm.
They're quite, because of the internet, I think film goers are very savvy about how films are made. So you have to almost up the standards, if you like, of the quality of the sets in order to make them really believable. And that's what we tried to do. And again, this is another sketch looking at the sort of the basin of the lost city of Akator. Again, it was inspired by Machu Picchu, something that I know George was very intrigued about and had pushed and advised that that's where I should go with some of the designs. And that's why you see what you do, this sort of huge basin in the center of this sort of mountainous area. And this is, again, just a sketch to show, I think in this case, I think that's Indiana Jones at the bottom there, just
Yep.
climbing up and showing how the thing's crumbling. And again, these are just pencil sketches. They're about, A4 size, or for our American friends here, 8.5 by 11. And it's that sort of size formats. They're not very big and they're quick to do. And I found them very, very fast as a communication tool with Stephen, while I was pitching some of these ideas.
That's amazing. It's so just kind of sort of it's not really off the conversation, but you talked about, how the sketch of the person at the bottom is Indiana Jones. And it's just one of the Indiana Jones has become such an iconic figure that anytime you see even like a silhouette or a person from the back with a
Mm.
fedora on, um, you just assume it's Indiana Jones. I mean, it is here, but I'm just saying the amount of impact that has had on popular culture, even in, TV series and films, they'll always do a little parody here and there. But yeah, what an iconic character. I just wanted to point that out. Not that we don't know that, but just wanted to say that. This is a beautiful sketch. I love the details on the facial parts of those.
Mm.
Yeah, those. Talk about that, please. I'm not a very big archaeologist or any kind
Mm.
of knowledge that I have, but please go ahead.
Well, I needed the architecture to reflect um, the sort of the aesthetic of the Mayans and the Aztecs, and sort of a mixture of that, of all those incredible cultures in South America. And so, but also we were dealing with sort of a fantasy make-believe place, Akator. So I borrowed heavily from and was inspired heavily from all of those ancient cultures to create these designs. And what you're looking at here is me really getting into the weeds, so to speak, in terms of the level of detail with the pencil sketches. And again, I remember doing this one and kicking myself and saying, my God, I'm spending way too long on these drawings. You know, this one would have taken me probably a day to do. And again, a lot of it is because I enjoy it so much. You know, here you are, you're given this opportunity to design for Steven Spielberg. Oh my God, you know, it's got to be the best thing you've ever done. And you know that George is going to be looking at this, and all these things are going through your head while you're designing. And so I remember really trying to stop myself from going into too much detail, and not make it about presentation and make it about the sort of the journey, if you like, of the characters in this script. And again, I used to be a professional illustrator. I would illustrate for a lot of very renowned designers. And so finally, when I got to design, it was quite hard for me to put my tools down and move into the production design seat, where you still get to draw, you still get to create an overview of the world, but you can't dedicate days and days of your time to
Yeah.
sketching out every single prop. You just simply don't have enough time to do that unless you're prepared to sacrifice your weekends and your own free time, which of course I'm silly enough to do sometimes. You know, if I get really excited about an idea, I'll say, well, I don't have enough time to do this during my day job, but I'll take this home and work late into the night to get it done, because I just enjoy that
Of
process
course.
so
Of
much.
course.
And so I suppose that's a long way of saying that's why this drawing is so detailed.
Yeah. Um, Let me just go back here.
You know, it's funny going back to what you were saying about the iconic nature of Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford and what he wears and how he wore it and all of that. There's a couple of fun stories I've got to share.
Please,
So
please.
we first did camera tests with Harrison over at Universal, and I'm pretty sure about this story. The costume was, as you may know, George Lucas is meticulous about his archiving. He keeps all the props and all the original artwork and everything. It's all stored very carefully, I believe, somewhere up in San Rafael, a property that George has, archives. And I remember a box coming out with the original costume for Indiana Jones. This is a true story. And Harrison fitted in this costume perfectly. And how
Wow.
many years have gone by? I mean, he
27
was in
almost.
such he was an absolute gentleman and a lovely person to work for and with. And I had some interaction with Harrison simply because of his background as you know a before he became a film star
Carpenter. Yeah.
actor. He was a carpenter, a master carpenter, and so he took a lot of interest, I think, in the set design and who the production designer was, and his environments as a professional. So I was very lucky to get to spend a little time with Harrison and show him around, for example, what would become his apartment, which was again on a soundstage at Universal. And he was in such great shape. Oh my goodness, for a man of his age, with respect, I mean, he could not have been in better shape. He looked incredible. And he slipped into his original Indiana Jones costume for these film tests. I mean, I'm sure they made him some new ones for this film because he was going to get through them, because he was going to do a lot of the work, the stunt work himself. But But yeah, for the test, it was the original costume, and he slipped right into it. And I think it's worth sharing that, was
Yeah, that again, that is so thankful of you to share that. And I when I was watching Indiana Jones yesterday, so it's funny how your mind plays tricks on you, right? So when
Mhm.
Dial of Destiny I was watching last year, obviously in your head it's like, okay, this guy is like almost late 70s. I don't know his exact age, but I'm guessing he's late
Mm.
70s. And then I saw Kingdom of Crystal Skull. I'm like, oh my God, he looks so young. But then I realized how long ago that was. It's almost
Yes,
been
it was a long time ago.
20 years ago, right?
No.
Um, but I mean, but the amount of charisma he has. I just rewatched Fugitive, which was a big film in the early 90s. He's been able to carry that throughout his career, even up until Dial of the Destiny when that came out last year. And I know he's working on some other shows like 1923 with
Mm.
Helen Mirren. But yeah, no,
Mm.
that's a great story. Any other story you want to share? I'd rather hear those. Um, we can talk about this too, but yeah, you pick. You tell me what you want to do.
Well, you've moved on to another sketch here, which is kind of fun. This we're looking at the same sketch on the right, obviously, but on the left you can see how, again, in sketch form, I'm laying out some quick drawings to explain how those stairs would work, just in case it's unclear from the drawings. So you see
Yeah.
how they would slip into the side of the outer edge of this giant pit, this first sort of big booby trap that they go through. Um, and we'll see as we go through the photographs. I think I found a photograph of the set, and you could see the exterior was this sort of remarkable, complex, almost musical instrument where each of the steps was connected to a cable that ran around the outside of this spiral. And each of these cables formed their own exterior spiral, which all led down to a single mechanism that pulled all the wires. So it was this very strange, almost surrealistic giant musical instrument from the outside this set. It was a really interesting one to work on.
That's amazing. This is the photo that you're
That
talking about,
is the
right?
photo. And you can
Yeah.
imagine, look at those people up there. This was a tricky set to shoot, but uh, hopefully worthwhile. A large section of it actually pulled out, so we could actually float a wall to make it easier to shoot. And of course, at the bottom of this, we actually had a pool of water with all those spikes, and it was a lot of fun dressing that set because we had put skeletons with sort of conquistador armor on them, as though there had been some Spaniards back in sort of the 16th century who'd maybe found their way in but didn't make it, which of course is part of the Indiana Jones tradition. I still remember in the first film when the spikes came out and there was sort of a skull stuck on one of the spikes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
So
remember that.
that's what people want to see. That's what the inner 10-year-old boy wants to see. And that's something I think that Stephen understood so well. And all I was trying to do was live up to those expectations.
Yeah. It's interesting you talked about the inner 10-year-old, right? So while we're talking about Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny and the original three films, the fact that Kingdom of Crystal Skull was not liked by people, including myself, when it came out, and now it's liked by a lot of people, including myself, I wonder if it has anything to do with the film, which it probably does. But I wonder, not just Indiana Jones, just in general, I think we are more drawn to our experience of watching a film
Mm,
as time progresses. We kind of
100% true. Yeah.
look back at it like, oh, you don't remember. Like I remember watching The Sixth Sense in the theater. I watching The Matrix and maybe even some terrible films, but just the experience that stays with you, and then over time you realize, oh, and then you appreciate that. This is just what I think. Sometimes a game that goes in our head, and we might end up liking Dial of Destiny in about 15, 20 years. Who knows,
Yeah.
right?
I agree with you. I think the issue surrounding Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and why it had this very odd backlash is simply because the film could have been Lawrence of Arabia, and it could not have lived up to the expectations of the fan base.
Yeah.
They had placed the three films, and they were brilliant. They had placed them on such a pedestal of impossibility that it was impossible to match the expectations. I don't know what people thought they were going to see. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
you had people would say to me things like, "Well, I didn't like the way that he jumped in a refrigerator and survived a nuclear blast." Well, they can laugh their heads off at that, but may I remind them that in the original Indiana Jones films, as I think Kathy Kennedy pointed out to me, uh, Indy and his gang launched themselves from an aircraft in flight in an inflatable
Yep.
boat,
I was just gonna talk about that, yeah.
and the boat lands in the rapids the right way up with them all alive, and they sail down the river. So, if that's the logic of the films, why is Indiana Jones in a lead lined refrigerator any different? And I think people just forget this stuff. And the internet has a way of catching on fire with people's comments. So if somebody said, I didn't like the fridge, how would anyone survive in a fridge? Um, they are, then you end up getting all the responses. Yeah, of course, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But hang on a minute, guys and girls, go back, look at the other films, and look at some of the crazy ideas that happen there. And of course, I think George and Stephen were well aware that they were playing these games of impossibility. Everything Indiana Jones does is impossible. His whip has about 5 or 6 different lengths in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, just to be able to make it possible for him to do some of the things he does with the whip. But we don't think about those things because it's called filmmaking, and it's
Well,
supposed to be fun.
it's interesting you talked about the refrigerator. So I was one of those people. I remember
Of
sitting
course,
in the movie.
everyone
Yeah,
was. Yeah.
sitting in the movie theater, and I'm like, how is this possible, right? And I think the what you just answered is so true. What you just said is so true because I think what happens is when you're young, you're stupid, right? Like for the lack of a better word, you're silly, you believe, and then you fall into this world that's been created for you over a span of 8, 9 years, one film after the other, and you
Right.
constantly believe it. But when you get older, the whole reality kicks in, like, oh, this isn't how it's supposed to be. You start, nitpicking stuff. But again, watching the film yesterday, the refrigerator scene, I thought it was hilarious. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's supposed to be. It's
yeah,
supposed to be part of that universe, the Indiana Jones universe. I don't see why that's unbelievable. And watching Aliens and ET is more believable.
yeah.
It's part of that escapism and that wonderful world that Stephen and George, when they work together, take us to.
100%, 100%. I'm just gonna see if there's something here that we can do. So this was,
Ah, yeah. So this is one of the sets we built for the exterior of Akator. And this was built actually on the back lot at Universal. There are a couple of spots at Universal around the back of the amusement park there where we still have places where we can build exterior sets. And so this was one of those places. I think it was, I forget the name of this area, but it's just above somewhere called Falls Lake, which of course is
mm,
the big tank they have up at the back of Universal
yeah, yeah, yeah.
for all the water work and so forth. So there's another space hidden further up the hill at the back of Universal where we built this. And of course, you never build more than you really need to, because to a certain extent that's irresponsible. But what you do build, you want to make sure it looks really realistic and very convincing. So these are some of my just set photos and records of the set.
You know, if you if I was looking at this for the first time, I would imagine this is literally the real place. But then when you look in the corner bottom of the picture, I think you see like a truck trailer. But
Yes.
nevertheless, everything about this picture is as realistic as it can be. So kudos to you for, working on such an incredible piece. I mean, this is crazy. I'm just gonna like just to look
Yeah.
at that. Like now, yeah, it looks like a set, right? But
Right.
still, right? But it's just, yeah, magic of filmmaking, that's
It
all it is.
it is. And actually looking at these photos bring back such fond memories, At the time, um, in Los Angeles, there were still very big productions being made there. And I didn't have the benefit of a crystal ball to look into the future and see how rare building something like this would be these days, in the center of LA.
Hmm.
It was still commonplace to build big sets. And I remember in the art department, it was filled with people that I know and love who were incredibly skilled set designers, illustrators, um, 3D modelers, prop makers. The decorator on this film was a gentleman called Larry Diaz, a very renowned set decorator, a friend of mine. But the list of people who worked on Indiana Jones is really rich with talent and friendships. And seeing these photos does take me back. It's such a long time ago now. A lot of them have gone on to become production designers and supervising art directors and decorators, and they have their own legacy now. But at the time, we were all working with a common cause, which is we were all kids who were fans of Indiana Jones and wanted to uh, recreate that world for a new audience. We were all driven to do that. It's lovely to see these photos again, I have to say.
Does it ever occur to you that 2007 was 2007 it came out, right? I think. Yeah.
I think so.
2008. 8,
Mm.
8. 2008. It doesn't seem that long ago, but it is almost 20 years ago.
I know, I know.
Like
Yeah,
2008 does not seem long ago. Like 1999, maybe it's because of the millennium and all that, but still, it's just bizarre how I can't believe that. Let me show you something actually. You might appreciate this. I just remembered this. I have one of these.
oh,
It's
look at
a
that.
it's a little like a sort of created for the fans. 1981, 1984, 89, 2008.
Yeah, wow, how brilliant is that?
Right? This is, I think, all Juice Drusen's work. I'm guessing. I don't have any
Yeah,
official.
how lovely. How lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's back for more. Yeah. Anyways, I just thought I should share that.
I
But
know I have a very dear um uh item from the film. I rarely walk away from these films with anything, to be honest with you. Nothing really. I don't really walk away with anything. I just never think about it. But one of the things that I was able to get on Indiana Jones was I was called to set one day and presented. It was my birthday. I think it was
mm,
August 20th, and we were shooting. And this says a lot about Stephen and who he is. I was called to set and given as a gift uh, one of Harrison Ford's fedoras that had been used, and on the inside rim, it was signed by Stephen,
oh wow.
Harrison, and George, and I still have it today. And you can imagine that gift is very dear to my heart, and will be something I'll pass on to my daughters, when they understand how important that artifact is. Just not in the sense that this great filmmaker gave it to me, but what it means for the legacy of film. It's a very special thing, and that's a testament to who Stephen is. He knew I was a fan, and I'm sure he thought, well, what can I give this guy for his birthday? And he thought, I know. you know?
I've actually heard from a lot of people that I've spoken to, and I've read a lot that, he is a businessman, obviously. There is that side of him, which he has to. but at
Yes.
the end of the day, he's a incredible human being.
Yes.
I was
Yes.
speaking to I think it was Dean Parisot who directed Galaxy Quest we worked with.
Mm,
And we were talking about something, and he went to Spielberg. This is when Dean was probably just in his early days. Like I think he did Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And he went to Steven and he said that, well, what do you think? Um, and Steven said, well, it's your film. You do what you want to do. I'm just here to give you suggestions. And I mean, that to come from somebody like that of that caliber, if it was a studio executive only, like not a director, he or she would have been like, okay, you got to do this, you got to do this. But for him to say something like that, even at that level, is a testament to who he is, 100%.
I know you got to imagine the breadth of experience and memories that someone like Stephen must have. I rarely uh, pushed him into giving me backstories of things because I was so nervous that he'd see me as a fanboy and not his
Yeah, yeah,
production
yeah,
designer.
yeah.
So I rarely, pushed him for stories about his past. But, you know, he must have such experience having come up from really nothing and become the greatest living director that when he has young directors and DPs, productions, like whoever it is, come up to him, he must be able to channel a thought process that puts himself right back to the 70s or the 60s when he was dreaming about all this stuff and making it all want to happen. And I think that gives him this higher understanding of how to talk to other people who are, you know, in the film industry. We all feel as though he understands us because, of course, he's been there. And yeah, it's a remarkable skill that he has. It's interesting. You're looking here at the inner temple of Akator, and this was quite a feat to put this set together. And the one just before it that you're looking at, which is the door, I have. I think it's probably just a little further back. There you go. There it is. So this door worked. You see this in the film. And
Yep.
what you see is not CG enhanced. This is a real practical gag. And of course, they use the skull. They hold the skull up against the impression of the door, and it sets off this mechanism. And all of this had to work. And I remember being extremely nervous. And where we're looking at this photograph now, I'm not kidding you when I say I was on set that day, standing next to Stephen or very close to Stephen in this position with Yanu shooting this and just praying to God that it was going to work. Because you have to understand at this point in time, CGI was really in its massive takeover of the industry.
Yeah.
And arguably you could say that CGI had reached a level of believability where you could look at some things and believe them and other things where you couldn't believe it. Of course, we're now in 2025 and CGI is extraordinary. In fact, I would challenge a lot of people to even know what CGI anymore. It's that good when it's executed properly. But back then, 20 years ago, we were still at a time when the CGI could look a bit ropey, it could look a bit dodgy. And we can talk about certain scenes in this film a bit later that maybe suffer from that. But because I was aware of that, wherever I could create a real effect, like the disappearing staircase or the
Hmm.
main door to the Akator temple, that could be practical. I would fight tooth and nail for the finances and the uh, latitude to make those happen for Stephen, because I knew that that's why he was making this film. For him, it was a little bit of nostalgia. He mentioned it once or twice. It was nostalgic. And so for me, it was important for him to experience the nostalgia of seeing real stunts, and real gags. And I couldn't create the giant ball rolling down the tunnel because that had already been done brilliantly, you know,
Yeah.
back in the day, in 1980 or whenever it was that they created that. And so what could I do? All I could do was be clever and resourceful about my industrial design background and try and design and come up with things that I thought would be amusing or fascinating or just really cool to watch. And this was one of them. And the good news is the gag worked on the first go. We were able to reset it, but we didn't need to. It worked first go. And I was so thrilled about it. And a big shout out to special effects guru Dan Zudek and his amazing team. We had Dan Zudek on this film, and he is one of the great American special effects artists out there. And he and his team made this outlandish idea of mine actually work. But again, you can see the amount of detail in the set design here.
Yeah.
Really special. There was a beautiful illustration of this design that was created by an artist and good friend of mine, Miles Tevis, who had come up through Stan Winston's workshop designing, I think, largely creatures and things. But he was such a fan of Indiana Jones that I was able to get him as part of my team. Miles is a lovely human being and one of those incredible artists. And I remember he did a beautiful color illustration of this set that you're looking at. That was one of the ways I was able to sell the idea to Stephen. I didn't always sell everything to Stephen with pencil sketches. I had to also then back it up with these very beautiful color illustrations.
Amazing. And just to kind of give you a little comment in the world that we live in today with AI getting as real as possibly, like, in some cases it's really hard to decipher, kind of like
Right.
the next evolution. This picture, the amount of detail that's in there, at least for now, that may change in future, um, is a testament to the amount of detail and how real it looks. It
Hmm.
actually, it because of those spider webs, because you could also the actual objects, I could literally feel like I can just touch them, like in my head, I can
Right. Right.
feel the texture. So it's so amazing to see the real thing because I don't know if that would change in future. I mean, the way technology is going, it may, but I would like to believe that people would be, wise enough audience to be able to distinguish. I know I agree with you that there are some cases that you can't distinguish CGI versus
Right. Right.
real, but still, I would hope that that remains to a certain effect because real is real. That's just how I look at it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And you look at these sets, and for me, I still can't believe we did this. There's
Yeah,
a side of me that can't believe this. That decorating that you saw there in the temple was all gathered by Larry Diaz and his set dressing team. And the big totems at the back are based on that pencil sketch that you said you liked.
yeah,
I don't know if you noticed that.
yeah. I did, 100%, 100%. No, I'm just looking at it. It's just breathtaking. It's absolutely beautiful, and obviously, it comes from the concept that you others have created to be able to bring it to where it is.
I have a lot of good stories about Indiana Jones. It really was a gift to my professional life. The little town that we put together, the little Nuke Town. I actually, it was such a busy production. We were in so many locations. I mean, you have to imagine we were in New Mexico, we were in Los Angeles, we were just everywhere, Hawaii, that it was very hard for me to stick around and watch the master at work, watch Stephen and Janusz Kaminski work, which is something I really wanted to do. But and this was one of those occasions. I basically got this set ready, and left to go to the next set. You know, it was just like a knock-on effect. You have to keep moving, you have to keep moving, and you're always ahead of the shooting crew. But I remember getting this great phone call, came through from Christy McCosco, who at the time was Stephen's executive assistant. I think she's now a producer. And she said, you know, hold for Stephen. And I thought, oh no, what's he gonna say? And he just got on the phone and complimented me on the set and said he absolutely loved it. I mean, who does that? You know, so
Steven Spielberg.
he got on the phone, tracked me down again. Well, now it was easy. He had my cell phone,
Yeah.
and just said, Guy, we're here in New Mexico. We're shooting, you know, Doom Town, it was called. That's right, Doom Town. And the set's amazing. I absolutely love it. I love the details. And it was such a great call to get, and actually gave me the energy and the sort of the power to go on, because there were some low points in this production. I was exhausted, you know, and it was lovely to get that phone call from him. But it was a fun set. You know, we had all sorts of funny things. There was the all the dummies that we posed around the set, which you see. He shot very cleverly in quick cuts. And of course, this was based somewhat on history. There was a time out in Nevada where they would set up fake houses with dummies and cars and gardens and things like that, and basically blow them up to see how they would respond to these nuclear blasts. And so really we were just enlarging on what history had done. Now, what I did for the design was I decided to make it this quintessential, perfect 1950s Americana, you know, with all the bright colors, the classic sort of 50s colors that you expect to see when you're getting very nostalgic about that time period. So, and again, we couldn't build all the houses because, of course, it's a sort of a little cul-de-sac that we ended up building. But we built it in a way that it looked as though it was a lot more than it was. And this was another one of those sets where instead of using pure visual effects, ILM actually built a miniature copy of my set to blow up on ILM, and then that was then enhanced with CGI. So we were still at a time when models were being used and enhanced by CGI.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Let me see what else is here that you can.
Oh, yeah.
That,
Yeah.
that looks great.
So
Go on.
I'm laughing because, of course, one of the legacies and one of the things that haunted me about reading the script that I got, I think it was David Kopp, right, who wrote the script, was that it started with this amazing sort of situation where Indy finds himself at the huge storage facility at Area 51, which of course is where the Ark is stored in the original Raiders of the Lost Ark. And as I read it, I got chills, you know. I just thought, oh my God, because I was well aware that the original storage facility at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark was one of those just masterful matte paintings that was done on glass by all those talented matte painters. And forgive me for not remembering specifically who did that matte painting, but I'm sure it's one of the greats. And of course, we see the lone caretaker taking the Ark in a wooden crate and sort of disappearing into the darkness as the credits roll at the end of Indiana Jones. What a perfect end. What a perfect end to a perfect film. And so here I am. I'm the production designer, and I'm responsible for taking that matte painting, which they could not have afforded to have done back then. And I had to turn that into a real set that was going to have action and car chases and Indy swinging around on his whip, being chased by a bunch of Russians. And of course, we had the magical moment where we see one of the crates get knocked open and we see the Ark. Just
Yeah.
I fell off my seat reading this stuff. And so I had to do that. And it was extremely hard and well, I had to use every ounce of ingenuity and use the brains of a collective group of people to figure out how to make this happen. And to cut a very long story short, what you're looking at here is a hangar in New Mexico that we found that was a wooden structured roof. So when you look at this, it is a period correct hangar from the front.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see the sun's going down. We're adjusting the camera. These boxes are reminiscent of the boxes in the matte painting, but I'm standing pretty much at the back of this hangar. It's not very deep. I'm just going to tell you that now. I'm going to break all the secrets here. And when you turn the camera around and look back into this space, we're actually in Los Angeles, and I'm trying to remember where we did this now, but it was the old facility where they built the shuttles, these massive warehouses south of LA. Oh goodness me, I have absolutely forgotten, but
It's okay.
It'll come to me. And that place was massive. And so all these boxes here were transported there, plus another, I don't know, I want to say 4,000 or 5,000 boxes. But what's interesting about them is these boxes are not individual boxes. They're actually singular units that make up entire aisles that are mounted on wheels that are hidden, so that when Stephen and Janusz needed to move these boxes around to facilitate shots, we could basically lift up the boxes with these little gas lifts and push them around en masse in these huge groups of boxes. In many ways, I wish I'd videoed some of this stuff to show the clever tricks that we used. So this set was split between two, but as I said at the beginning, it's supposed to be this famous facility at Area 51 where we see the Ark being hidden at the end of Raiders. Amazing, amazing experience.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's see what else we got here that you sent.
Now this is at that place. So again, a lot of these boxes, we had a handful of them which were individual, which we could move around for dressing. But Harrison's actually standing on a large structure, reinforced structure, that's a singular collection of boxes that appear to be many boxes, but it's one giant structure which we could move around.
Mm-hmm.
But this gives you some idea of the scope of the production.
Yeah.
It was absolutely enormous.
100%.
Look at that. Yeah, this is the, of course, the jet sled.
Oh, this is the statues from that town that you were talking about.
That's right, the dummies. Doomtown Dummies. We always thought that would make a great band name, Doomtown Dummies.
There is the refrigerator.
The famous refrigerator that caused all the controversy, yep.
Yeah.
And this is lovely. This is a set on stage at Universal, and it, of course, is a recreation of Harrison's apartment. And it was really interesting because in the first, I think, I'm trying to remember now where his apartment on the campus appears. I think it's in Temple of Doom, and I think it also appears
in Last Crusade. Yeah.
But in both cases, they were different apartments. They never used the same location. They were two locations, and they were in the UK, and they were both different. So what do you do? What do you do when you're expected to study the film, figure out the layout of his apartment and then build a set that's identical. However, there are two different apartments with different layouts. How do you do that? Well, what you have to do is combine them. So I opted for a set that would be reminiscent of both the apartments that we saw in the various films, so that people that would watch this film would go, oh yeah, I kind of remember that front door. Oh yeah, I sort of remember that couch or the fireplace, you know. So I tried to channel both of them together. And I do remember there was a bit of a know-it-all working on the production. I have no idea who it was in the end. And they had sort of whispered into someone's ear that I'd got the set wrong. You know, guys got the
Mm.
set wrong. And it was on the day of the shoots. There was nothing you could do about it. Um, and I got called to set to explain myself. And I sort of explained, you know, look, it's not that particular location or that particular location. It's an amalgamation of them both. It's a fusing together of these two places into one set. And that was a good enough explanation for Stephen. He was like, yeah, great. It's fine. Looks great, you know, and he got on with it. But I remember fuming about it and thinking, who was it that you know, put the spanner in the works there and said that, you know, it's not right, you know.
Yeah, no, that always tends to happen at any kind of job. There's always that one person, I shouldn't say always, but sometimes creates the, drama. But no, these are great. Is
It was a
there any?
lovely set. It was a lovely, lovely set. And I had to actually show Harrison around that set in person. And that's where I first got to meet him. I was very nervous. As I say, I saw him a couple of times in the film tests. And that's when, of course, he put on his original costume and it still fit. But that was the first time I had FaceTime with him. And yeah, he was really interested. He went around, he opened drawers, he looked at sort of all the artifacts and noted all the Easter eggs that we'd placed. And he straight away, I think, warmed up and realized that I was taking this responsibility very seriously. Um, yeah.
Was there any funny moment or story when you were taking him around, but besides looking at the work that you were
It
doing?
was
Just
Harrison was always interested in the aircraft because, as you know, we had a couple of
he's a
aircraft in
pilot.
the film, and
Yeah.
he's a pilot, and he's very interested in historical aircraft and wanted to know what the aircraft were that we were using. He wanted to make sure that we were using the right aircraft. I remember we talked about aircraft which I know nothing about, and we eventually morphed that conversation into talking about motorbikes, motorcycles, which I didn't realize. It turned out he was a bit of a fan. And of course, I'm an absolute motorcycle maniac. And we ended up talking about, I remember Vincent Black Shadows, which is a very old and somewhat famous motorcycle in the world of motorcycling, and we both turned out to be huge fans. And at the time, I was planning to buy one, and I think he'd either owned one or also agreed that he wanted one. So we had this kind of very interesting little sort of gearhead conversation in the middle of Indiana Jones. It was nice.
Well, there's a motorbike in the film as well. I mean, I don't know anything about
Oh
motorbikes,
yes,
but
there
there's
is.
there's
Yeah.
a there's a famous popular scene. Um, but wow, man, what a thank you for sharing all these great stories and your behind the scene work because I'm sure there's tons more. Like, and I always wonder, you look at the making of a film or director's commentary, but I always wonder if there is, you take one film, whichever it is, and you grab, just like a short documentary, right? Like you grab like 10 different people from 10 different jobs who worked
Right.
on the film and share their stories and put it in a podcast series. I mean, it's such a wealth amount of knowledge that people can gain, not, obviously learn something from, but also just reconnect with something that you enjoyed as an audience member.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And you know, that period was really full on for me. I mean, I remember it just went on and on and on. That those sort of films. I went, I think, from Indiana Jones to I think Inception after that, maybe with Chris Nolan,
Yeah.
and it just, yeah, it's a very, very rich time for interesting films that sort of stay with you. And the knowledge that you gain from those kind of films are, it's really very, very precious and very special, and something that you can bring to all the productions that you do after that. I mean, some of the tricks of the trade that I learned on Indiana Jones, for example, I've brought onto Masters of the Universe with Travis. Some of my tendency to be very, very detail oriented, and making sure that the sets look absolutely real. That's something that I have a passion for. So in the unbelievability of the environments, I want to make sure that once people are there in the cinema, they're looking at these sets or these environments, characters, spaceships, whatever it is you're designing, and saying, "Oh my God, that's so cool and it looks so real." That's always the thing. You want people to not have to think about whether the set looks good or not. You want them to think
Yeah.
about the story, the character. That's what you want them to focus on.
And when the set is good and it's realistic and it fits in with the character and the story, like you said, I mean, the audience is completely bought into it, right? Like,
Yeah.
because if it was like a little bit off, then they will pick it up. Or if it was a little too much overdone, they will pick it up. But at the end of the day, just having, it's like an orchestra, right? I mean, you know it and I know it. Like having everything in sync. Every department is important because one without the other, the film suffers.
It's very true. That's very, very
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Guy, for your time. Is there anything else that you want to add on? Any other little tidbits?
No, thanks so much for having me. It's lovely that you wanted to talk about this film. I mean, it's one of those things, you're on a film for a period of your life, and then when it comes out, there's usually a surge of interest, and you try to help, you know, promote the film or explain how it was made, and then that all dies away, and the film is lost in time. Other than perhaps you'll see it on TV at a hotel or something. You never see it again very often. I certainly don't sit through old films that I've worked on. Maybe I will when I'm old, but not yet. And so it's interesting when you have opportunities to talk about, something like this that you really haven't thought about for, yeah, 15 years, 20 years. It's
Yeah.
a great opportunity. So thank you for having me and wanting to discuss this. It's nice.
No, I appreciate your time and your consideration of talking about this film, but also, like I said earlier in the beginning of the conversation, the amount of films that you worked on that I personally admire. And the only films that I like to talk about on this podcast or series or books
Mm,
is something that I personally resonate with. Doesn't mean
right.
that the other stuff is not good, right? And I would love to have you on again, maybe to talk about Inception or any other project that
Oh,
you like, because it would
yeah.
be always fascinating to have to talk about stories of how films are made that you don't necessarily see in the making of or in other interviews. So would love to have you again.
It's also nice, I think you're right, to look at these films retrospectively, you know, having talked about them so much after they come out,
Yeah.
and there's that huge gap where nobody wants to talk about it anymore. And then having a sort of a retrospective revisit of it is really kind of a lovely thing. I mean, so I'm very grateful to you for having me on. Thank you.
No, thank you. Pleasure's all mine. Good luck with Master of the Universe, and we'll be in touch
Yeah.
soon to have you back on.
All right. Take care.
All right,
Cheers.
take care. Bye
Bye.
bye.